All right, we're back with another video, and it's a series of math lessons. It was hilarious as we were just getting started to hit record. Suzi, you go, math. Math is such an
Yeah.
essential function of the supply chain. And so, Brian, you've kind of put these formulas together for your own personal use in your current role, and you said there may be some variation of these, but it really helps people get on the right track. And all of this conversation spun out of our emergency preparedness videos that we had done, which was kind of a high level conversation. Now we're going to get a little bit more granular. If you missed the first video, I do just want to point everybody back. We talked about reorder point formula. And so we talked through the nuances of that calculation and the considerations, like such as around lead time. So now we're going to be talking about the reorder quantity formula. That'll be in this video. And then on the next video, we'll talk about formal safety stock, safety stock, and really pull everything together in a wrap up. So 3-part series. Brian, do you want to tee up reorder quantity formula for us?
Yeah, so reorder quantity, it's very kind of similar to reorder point. So again, the reorder point is the point at which you want to have a new order placed. Reorder quantity then tells you how much of that product should you order. And Suzi, this really goes kind of in hand with what we were talking about last time with unit of measure. This is something that we really want to be careful about. Are we ordering a box, a case, and each? We try to have everything broken down to the each, especially if it's a stock item or something that goes to the OR or is a patient chargeable item. Again, you can't charge a patient for a box of things, but you can charge them for an each. But that's where some of these things come into play too. So if your reorder quantity needs to be a box, because let's say your distributor or the manufacturer only orders a box or a case, you can't say I want one each. I think Suzi would agree that would be really helpful, especially for some of the low moving items. But unfortunately, it's not always an option, if especially outside of low unit of measure or LUM. So keeping that in mind, that's an important factor of it too. So reorder quantity, relatively simple, but what you're looking at here is the average daily usage, and then you're going to multiply that by your average lead time. So again, taking that into account, we're looking at the same things as we were for the reorder point, but now we're trying to figure out, all right, once we place that order, how much product are we going to use and how much will it take to get back to that reorder quantity? And so relatively simple, but a couple little caveats that I like to throw in here too. When we use this, and again, we use, I'm just going to say kind of an archaic system. People are like, wow, you can get all this data. It's like, well, this is really coming out of text files, and then we convert it to Excel, and then we're using like concatenate to try to figure these different Excel formulas out so that I can actually get this into usable format. So again, this isn't something that's easy necessarily, but again, it's not super challenging as long as you can get your hands on the data. So when we look at average lead time, that we need to be careful about too. So Suzi, you probably know if you order from distributor A all the time, but then that product goes on back order, that doesn't mean you stop ordering it. That means now you've got to look at
Right.
distributor B or distributor C or manufacturer A, manufacturer B. I mean, we're constantly sourcing products wherever we can get them. Again, in a retail type environment, if you run out, that's a lost sale. That's a bad thing. But in a hospital, we've got people that need these products. These are taking care of patients, maybe keeping our staff safe, so on and so forth. So when you're looking at average lead time, the way that we do it and that I found the most useful is to look at that primary point that we're reordering from. I don't want to get an average lead time of all areas because, again, if I have one product that goes on back order and that lead time gets extended, that's going to skew the numbers if it's a one-time event. So knowing where you're ordering the product from is just as important as what Suzi's point is knowing how many of these, whatever that unit of measure, you've got your purchase unit of measure, and then you've got your issue unit of measure, making sure that that's tied up in your item master and in your purchasing file, super critical. So again,
Yep.
relatively simple and straightforward, but just a couple things to look out for. Again, I think that it's most beneficial to look at the primary point that you're ordering it from and base that lead time off of that as opposed to everything. Again, that's my personal opinion, just because I'd like to take and drill down as granular as I can.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting to think about too, and for me with having 3 sites, really 4 sites, is also looking at those things that come as a box of 50, where I might need 20 at my bigger hospital, but I can get away with 10 at my smaller sites. So we're really trying to strategically look at things this year as well to kind of break it down to the each at our own level locally, because we can't order it in a smaller unit of measure from the distribution partner. So that's another piece of it. If at all three of my sites I show I have an abundance of inventory, it's because usually how it comes, right? Not so much that I'm not using it, it's just a slow mover that comes in a large quantity. So I think that's another interesting opportunity for folks out there if they are managing multiple sites near each other.
And that's a really good opportunity too, Suzi. So I worked at another IDN that was up in the Portland metro area, and they utilize that same methodology to really help reduce inventory, especially of those slow moving, high dollar items and forms. Back then we used a lot of forms. They had a specific hospital set up and said, okay, you're going to take care of forms. So whenever a hospital needed a form, then they would, place the order, and then it automatically generated as something that needed to be couriered or shipped over from one of those other hospitals. So having that opportunity, if I was in your shoes, I would be excited. We talked about that during COVID, yep. But unfortunately my hospitals are literally states apart, that it really wouldn't help from that perspective. But even things such as pediatric trays, unless you're a pediatric hospital, you need to keep those trays, but typically you have to, buy a case of 10. And so if there's a way for you to look at keeping that stock at one of your hospitals and then setting up some sort of reorder system to draw from that through an intercompany transfer, then that's going to be hugely beneficial. Because to your point, why keep, if you've got 4 hospitals, 40 items in case of, 4 each, yep. And 99% of those are going to expire. So that's a really good opportunity. It takes a little bit more strategic oversight, but definitely an opportunity for those types of environments as well.
Absolutely. And I think I've got a big focus on 24 to stop being so reactive, which is kind of the behaviors we've gotten used to over the last 4 years, and really start getting back to being proactive and using the data that we have in front of us. So I'm excited to see the results of that and how it changes. And then obviously we can share with the rest of our hospitals throughout the country, but being able to do what we can locally here just makes sense. It's the time and the data, right?
It's interesting what you're saying, and I think it tees up our final video in this 3-part series, which is the safety stock, because, where are you storing that safety stock? And, the consideration or the scenario that you just laid out, I'm sure is going to play into that conversation, especially when you may have, low unit of measure, your daily usage rate is really low. It may come in spikes. And then how do you make sure that you have enough inventory? Oh, well, we have plenty of inventory, but how do we locate it is going to come down to that safety stock conversation as well. So everybody stay tuned. We've got part 3 coming up again in a couple of weeks. Suzi and Brian, thanks so much for your insights once again.